Hey guys, welcome back to another Weird Wednesday. I'm Ashers, and this is.
Octavian Graves.
And also,
Timothy Renner.
oh my gosh, I have. So last week I had two other women with me. Now I'm here with two other men. I gave Dee the courtesy to introduce herself. Octavian, why don't you go ahead and kind of introduce yourself a little bit? I know you've been on the show before, but I want people to kind of understand what you do. Octavian is potentially one of the new voices that you'll hear around here. I mean, even if you're not here on a regularity, I'm sure we'll have you back. But either way, go ahead and just tell people who you are and just a quick rundown of what you do.
Okay, so my name is Octavian Graves. I am the creator and host of the podcast Strange Dominions. I am both a Fortean researcher, explorer, as well as an occultist and magician. And I enjoy researching both separately, but my main passion is seeing where those two phenomena collide, correlate, and how one can be used to interact with the other.
It's a lot of fun. So I have actually consulted Octavian on some things in regards to some of those topics. We did an awesome episode on this show. I think it was called "The Magic of High Strangeness."
Yes.
Very fun, very neat topic. A lot of people really enjoyed it. And hopefully they come over and listen to your own podcast. After hearing more of you here on this show. So anyway, how was your weekend? What'd you do?
My weekend was pretty good. I went to a concert in Harrisburg, saw some old friends of mine, actually hung out with Timothy after the show because we live only about an hour and a half away from each other. That was pretty much the highlight of my weekend. I've been digging into some research from my own for Strange Dominions on magic circles and their history and usage and how one could possibly use that to investigate the paranormal.
Very cool. Very cool. And Timothy, it sounds like you were also you saw Octavian, right?
Yeah.
That's what is that what you did this weekend?
Yeah, he stopped by. What else did I do? It's my weekend versus week is kind of arbitrary for me because it's all podcast all the time. I was working on my books too. I'm writing a book currently, so
Okay.
it's
Sure.
all a mishmash of paranormal and weird history and everything else with me.
Oh, okay. No, that's totally fine. Sometimes weekends are just lazy. You're allowed to not do things or not do things that are necessarily memorable. So
Oh, it's more like I just don't stop. Like I just
same.
I I love what I do, right? I love this, so I really, if I'm awake, I'm working.
Yeah,
But it's happy. It's happy stuff.
I can
I'm a very lucky man that I get to do this for a living.
I completely understand. It is a constant, which is fun. It's totally fine. That's why you do it for a living, right? You take what you love and you find a way to make it work for you.
Amen.
So I'm here for it. I did some. I didn't do a whole lot, but I did go do some test filming with a friend who wants to make a horror movie, and it is very, very out of my realm. I'm only familiar with documentary filmmaking. I'm not really familiar with things like cinematography and artsy shots and things like that. So, while I was trying to show this person the ins and outs, because I don't believe they've ever filmed anything before, kind of how to film and different equipment and things like that to use, they kind of taught me how to look at things from a different scope. So that was a lot of fun. And the location that we were at was really pretty anyway. And it happens to be like right in my backyard and I had no idea it existed. So that was really cool. But other than that, I just, well, as everybody knows, I've been very busy just talking to different people, interviewing different people for these co-host positions, getting ready to unroll even more shows under the On Wednesdays We Talk Weird family. So that's great. It's actually been a lot of fun. I've made a lot of connections with people I've never talked to before, and I've really enjoyed having these conversations, as overwhelming as they've been. So it was good though. It was all right. So I want to, I have a couple of news items. You know, mm. One thing that I know people want me to talk about, and I'm going to talk about it like right now, but then I'm not going to mention it probably ever again unless something big happens, is the Mexican alien bodies.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I kind of briefly touched on it. I think it was last week or the week before, whenever it was that press conference happened. And I'm not going to continue to beat the dead horse and talk about every single step of the process. I guess some new scans or something were done of it. They still didn't really find anything, just if I'm honest.
I thought it came out that they did find that it was like composed of animal bones and plant matter.
I
And I had heard somewhere that it was it was children or something like that. That it was a human specimen, though.
See, did you hear that? You guys have two totally different perspectives. And the newest update was that they were scanned and it was led by some scientist, something or the other. And he had said that these were not like amalgamations put together. So I've heard everything from brutalized mummies to human children. I mean, to, well, like Timothy said, just animal bones. We're just not getting any answers here. And when I've tried to look into a lot of this stuff, it seems legit. I remember reading at one point in time that there was a DNA study done on these things from the University of Pennsylvania, and they had found that it was human DNA. So I don't know.
The
Yeah, that's what I was hearing.
The article someone sent me, and it's just a short article, and I'm not sure the source of it. So it says, investigation found that the mummies were recently made, created from animal and human bones joined together with synthetic glue. The bones, in turn, were covered with a mixture of plant fibers and synthetic glue to simulate skin, said the report from the Institute of Legal Medicine and Forensic Science in Peru. But I'm not I don't know the source of that. So
right. 5 minutes of research. I understand. That's about all I've put into it. I'll be quite honest with you. Not too much. I've just kind of read the hot button, newest article that comes out about them. And I did backtrack the history a little bit. These things have been around since I think 2017.
I remember seeing them before they came up in this recent, flap of articles.
Yeah, they've been around for a bit, and I think that they've undergone different testing. And I think that trying to figure out exactly what they are is difficult, because if the guy leading the whole group is sending out samples, you're going to get a result depending on what sample you receive.
Yeah.
So if you receive a sample from a human bone, well, you're going to get human. If you receive a sample from plant made to look like skin, well, then you're going to get plant. And that's a problem with these things. We would have to totally and entirely dissect them. I know there was some question about, ethics, and that these were likely just human mummies that were altered to look strange. And that's a problem, because you're really not allowed to do that. But nothing ever came of that either. So I don't really know. I just, listen, guys, I'm aware there's a video of these scans or whatever. I'm not buying whatever the guy's selling, and that's where I'm at with it. So that's my personal opinion. Did you guys want to give a statement on the Mexican aliens while you're here?
I mean, my opinion, whenever they come up with these bodies, whether it be aliens or Bigfoot, it's immediate skepticism, just right out the bat, because we've been through this ring 1,000 times before, and it's been the same result every single time. And it just doesn't seem logical to get excited about it until there's absolute proof of all of it.
Yeah, I feel much the same. It's it's like, disclosure's right around the corner. We're going to hear something in 2 weeks. I've been through this, for decades and decades now. So when everybody says, it's like, yeah, okay, hold your breath, because that ain't happening.
There's always a Rick Dyer in every phenomenon.
Oh, geez.
And you always have to be, really careful about that.
Disclosure, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I know people are very hopeful and thirsty for it, but I really don't think it's going to happen. It's, not all the way. We might get a little tidbit here and there, but I think the recent stuff with this disclosure is happening because the government wants information from us, not that they want to give us information. They want us to crowdsource sightings for them. That's all that is to me. They want to know where these things are popping up, so they want people to call in and tell them. Now,
I'm very much the same on that.
Whether they think they're Chinese craft or Russian craft or something alien or whatever, I don't know. But I think they're trying to get information from us, not the other way around. They're not going to give us anything real.
I,
Uh,
I, I could definitely see that. I mean, the thing about disclosure is that you can't disclose information that you don't have. And I've
Bingo.
said it repeatedly that I, just from my sources alone, and my sources are, well, guess what? Very important people at the Air Force Base, at Wright Pat Air Force Base. And they all say the same thing. You know what? We know a little bit, but we don't know enough. And
Exactly.
when they say they know a little bit, it's basically everything that we've ever been told here in this little fringe community. It's not
Hmm.
much else. And that's it. And so they can't give you information they don't have. And so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're just vetting for information from outside sources. That makes sense. And that's why I think that the Mexican government even like gave this guy a platform and displayed these alien bodies, because I think they know that these things have been proven to be bullshit. But I think that as a political move, they put it out there just so they could be like, well, this is what we have. We have alien bodies. What does everybody else have?
Right.
And that's what I think this is. And nothing's going to come of it because they're obviously not real alien bodies, in my opinion. But
Hmm. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, we'll see. We'll see how the story unfolds. And but for the most part, like I said, I'm not going to continue unless something big happens. I'm not going to keep revisiting this every week, you guys. I'm sorry. You can ask me my personal opinion on it. I'll get back to you when I can, but it'll probably much remain the same unless something groundbreaking happens with these alleged mummies. So there's that. But to shift gears a little bit, I've got some really fun news. So there is now a chupacabra outbreak happening in Tambola, Mexico, allegedly. Eight animals have been slaughtered in the course of a 10-day period. The thing about these animals, nobody's actually seen a chupacabra yet or seen the thing attacking the animals, but they're, of course, mostly goats and sheep. They have large bite marks on their necks. Some of the animals reportedly are fully decapitated. So that's fun. They happen a lot. these
Yeah,
stupid
with some regularity.
these chupacabra outbreaks happen a lot. These random mutilated animals. And what gets me about it, what's interesting is that we never like hear the conclusion. They just kind of seem to go away. And so I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that a little bit. What do you guys think? Do you have an opinion on these bursts of chupacabra that just kind of show up for a little bit and then don't ever come back again?
I'd be interested to see what else is going on. Like, are there other phenomena happening at the time that people aren't connecting? Are there weird lights, in the
Sure.
area? Are there are the people who have experienced these attacks, are their houses experiencing poltergeist phenomenon, or are they haunted? That's what to me would say, like, okay, something weird's going on there. Otherwise, I'm thinking, until we prove it's not, what, some sort of wildcat or something. How do we know? If nobody's claiming to have seen anything, it's just sadly, upsettingly, some dead animals.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. When you're looking at these things, it's important to see what the overall effect on the area is, if there's any kind of uptick in these other phenomena, and that to me gives it a lot more validity. But when it's just these one-off incidents, it's very difficult to see what the conclusion would be, because like you said, they just kind of go away. But when there's all these other things, that really points to something really going on.
Yeah. Chupacabra is it's an interesting beast. You've got this, and I'm not talking about the hairless canine, the Texas terror dog or what have you. Chupacabra seems to be more of an extraterrestrial phenomena. It's where it originated from. And we haven't really had a good dedicated researcher to be like the eyes and ears on the ground at the time that something like this is happening. So it seems to be that these villages are targeted, their animals are mutilated, and then it, like I said, it just goes away. I mean, is that part of the phenomenon? And if so, why? What's the motive? um are these things even intelligent at all? A lot of the reports that we get, I think it was 2021, there was one of my favorite stories. A UFO had landed in a small village and a chupacabra came out and terrorized the town for a couple of days before it went back up and left. And then again, we never heard anything about it. But again, even in that instance, that creature didn't seem, I mean, it definitely seemed a lot more primal. It didn't seem intelligent at all. So I mean, why?
Yeah,
What do you guys make of that?
yeah. I don't. Again, I mean, if you're just thinking back to the Mothman prophecies, if John Keel wasn't there putting boots on the ground and collecting all the other weird stuff besides people saying Mothman that was happening, would we have heard of any of that other weird stuff, or would we just have newspaper reports of, people saw a wing thing with red eyes?
Right.
It's the fact that he was so, my gut says, like, somebody local to this, go out there and start asking questions, put boots on the ground and start, seeing if there's other weirdness happening.
Yeah, I think that
And
would
my
be.
thing about like the chupacabra, it's always felt like one of these pop cryptids where there's a lot more effort going into making T-shirts and stuffed animals of it than there are researchers.
Yeah, fair. I can see that. Yeah.
So it never really captured my interest, just because I never saw a lot of valid, legit people putting a lot of work and time into documenting the sightings, documenting the connections between the sightings, the locations, things like that we have with Bigfoot, Dogman, Mothman, all these other things.
Squonk, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, admittedly, it is tough to research. If you're an American that doesn't speak Spanish, for one,
Sure.
you've got that language barrier. But when you do start to dig, if you can find some decent information, I mean, there is decent information out there. It's a fun one, but yeah, it's hard to sit down and want to go down that rabbit hole and pull out your Google Translate and figure it out. Takes a little extra work. So
yeah, I'm trying to source for another completely separate project. I'm trying to source UFO sightings from the 1960s in Spain, and it is very difficult.
It is. It is difficult, and you have to consider things like just even like lingo. Do they call? I mean, do they call them UFOs in Spain?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. Culturally, they might have a whole other approach to talking about them. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that for a minute. Again, these things pop up, and we will probably, I mean, of course, the police say that they're working on it. We probably won't have answers, whether it be just a coyote or, whether it be something more. I mean, this will probably disappear into the ether, and this will be the documentation of that event happening, and that'll be it.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting to note there. And in a true story of high strangeness, I personally fell down a rabbit hole when I was kind of reviewing my news articles here. You guys ever heard of Jason the Horse? Just immediately, Jason the Horse. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, it does. I couldn't give you any more information about that I've heard of it, but yeah, it does ring a bell.
I'm not familiar with that one.
I wasn't either until about 2 hours ago. So Jason the Horse, or as his human name is James Wentworth, is a gentleman that believes that he was a horse in a past life. He actually wrote an entire book about it. It's called "What If You Are a Horse in Human Form?" And this has kind of like consumed his whole identity because he doesn't like to be human. He very much preferred to be a horse, and has all kinds of interesting otherworldly, or had all kinds of interesting otherworldly experiences in regards to equestrian ancestors. It is a whole other whole other beast that I'm not gonna truly deep dive today. But apparently, Jason the Horse, or James rather, he died. He died recently, and which kicked me off into this whole rabbit hole of people like him. So hopefully, he is now a horse again. But
you missed an opportunity to say it bucked you off. But go ahead.
Oh, jeez, you're right. Damn it! I'll have to edit this episode. But yeah, he first came into the public eye by going on Coast to Coast, of course, and shared his story of being a horseman back in 2009, and has since had, I guess, a community of people approach him saying that they also very much are horse people. He says that other horses, he believes, have actually recognized him, and that they may have known each other in his past horse life.
You know how they greet each other?
How do they greet each other?
I say, hey.
Oh my God. I should have known. That's why I need my soundboard. I don't have any noises up here. I need to add those in here.
But to be more serious, I had someone on Strange Familiars, my podcast, and she was very serious, fully believed that, and I'll take her at her word. I don't know that she wasn't. So I'm making light, but I'm not making fun. Let's put it that way. she fully believes she was a wolf in a past life and has memories of running through a particular forest and went to that forest and according to her, she knew the trails without ever having been there before. So
Yeah.
maybe this is a thing.
It's immediately when I read it, it sounds so silly and ridiculous. But when you start like really looking into it, like I said, he claims that he had an encounter with another horse who saw him and immediately started like shaking, and then got the stablemate, and the stablemate came out and was like angry at him, and he's like convinced that it's because they knew each other already. It's so strange.
Wow.
And then he's got memories of, he believes that he was a horse specifically in England, because he had visited there one time, and it was very familiar. And like I said, he really didn't like being a human. And so when the news had come out last year that, he was very sick, he was terminally ill, he actually said he looked forward to dying because he wanted to be a horse again. So, I mean, rest in peace, but like also good for him. I mean, if that's where he's going, maybe he's a horse, maybe not. Maybe, your strong will when you're alive now, you kind of get to choose what your next life is. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting story. If you guys are interested in doing some reading on him, I'm gonna buy his book. I'm gonna read it. I'm curious now.
I might too. That sounds really interesting.
It's just something a little bit different. It's something that I don't think is talked about a lot, but people do talk about it. People do have these experiences. So I'm curious. But yeah, I found this because I found out he passed recently. So unfortunate that I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but very neat story. So
Rest in peace, horseman.
rest in peace, Jason the horse. Was his name. All right. Well, that's all the news that I had this week. So unless you guys can think of something you came across this week that was interesting.
Oh
Nothing really that you didn't bring up, honestly, about the.
I'm thinking like the art. People usually send me stuff, but I'm thinking that was mostly the alien bodies. I think I got.
Yeah, that's been the hot topic lately. Well, sometimes you get no news, and that's fine. This week there ended up being a lot of fun stuff, so that's I'm pleased with that. At minimum, at least the horse story. I'm happy that I stumbled upon that. So
Yeah, that's a good oddity for the week.
you can't top that. Man thinks he's a horse. That's fine. Whatever. It is what it is. Timothy, do you want to kind of go through? Is it Timothy, or is it Tim, or is it Timmy? What do you prefer?
Anything but Timmy.
Anything but Timmy.
That's why I say Timothy. It usually avoids people. If you say Tim, some people will immediately turn into Timmy, which I'm only okay with that if you say it like South Park. So.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Okay, so new challenge unlocked. I gotcha. That's totally fine. So I mean, a lot of people that listen to the show are probably already roughly familiar with who you are. But if you want to go ahead and give the quick rundown, and then I'm just going to go ahead and we'll get into some whatever questions I can think of to ask.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an author. I write generally on, I guess, paranormal, Fortean type subjects. Few books on Bigfoot, some on local legend. I'm working on a book which I was hoping to have out this year, but it's probably going to be next year now, on hermits. So that's my first book that'll be sort of outside the specific paranormal realm, but hopefully still of interest to people who like this sort of stuff, and goes into like weird history and these guys and women who kind of pieced out and went off to live on their own. Most of them from around the turn of the century, turn of the last century, around 1900, late 1800s.
Very interesting.
But I do a podcast called Strange Familiars where we cover these topics. I talk with witnesses. We do stories on odd history. And my favorite thing we do is we do on-site episodes, which means I take the listener with us if we go out looking for Bigfoot or whatever, and to haunted places wherever we go. And if anything interesting happens, we have it on recording. So those are my favorite shows to do, but I can't do that every week because you can't make stuff happen while you're out there.
Yeah. Sure. Have you ever, what's the most interesting thing you've caught out and about with a witness?
We've gotten some really interesting sounds. Some of the sounds we caught at a place we call Site 7, we gave it a code name. There aren't 6 other sites. People always ask. It's just a random name we came up with.
Sure. Fair enough.
That we left a recorder overnight, and we got some really strange, sort of unknown speech. I don't want to compare it to the Sierra sounds because it's not that clear and it's not that good, but it's odd. It's very, very odd stuff we caught there. A lot of times you get to hear our reactions to things we see, like we were getting rocks thrown at us one night and caught some red glowing eyes. So you could actually hear the rocks hitting, but when we saw the red glowing eyes after that, that was pretty intense night.
Sure.
But I like it when we get unknown audio. We've caught some pretty cool EVPs and stuff at different places. But yeah, the unknown speech or whatever you want to call it at Site 7, that's probably some of my favorite audio we caught for the podcast.
Very cool. And you do this, you're based out of Pennsylvania, is that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And so what's the furthest you've traveled to go to a site with a witness?
So a lot of the times we'll just kind of pick places and we'll go ourselves and see what happens. So we've been to, Maryland, Virginia. Most of the stuff we do is in Pennsylvania just because it's a really big state. So,
Sure.
But we're open to going other places. We have plans for Northern Ohio. We have plans for to go down south too, in North Carolina, South Carolina as well. But it's making the time to do that, making it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the time, the money,
yeah.
the pre-research leading up to. Yeah, I gotcha.
If I remember correctly, Tim, you had a pretty interesting experience with a witness in Northern Maryland.
Bring it back.
What we would call Gazoo's Woods. That was our first meeting, actually.
Yeah, okay, yeah. We had that was a cool day. And a lot of weird sounds that day, like a tapping that just followed us. This is in February, right? Was it February or January?
It was February.
Yeah, ice on the ground, everything. This tapping that followed us around all day, and yeah, we've had some weird stuff at that place.
A possible sighting that day as well.
Oh yeah. We saw. I mean, I saw something that looked like. It's so weird. I hate saying this because I don't know what it was, but it looked to me like a Bigfoot as we're in the woods, and I locked my eyes on it because I've had this happen before. Where you look away and you look back and whatever's there is not there anymore. Mm-hmm. So I locked my eyes on it and I said, I'm going to walk towards this thing and it's either going to get up and run or we're going to walk up to it and find it's a tree or whatever else. And minutes before we had heard an owl. Now this is like 4 p.m. It wasn't dark yet. We heard an owl sound off and we were commenting on, oh, look, the owl during the day kind of thing. And we're walking towards this, and like I said, I have my eyes locked on it. I am not moving off this thing. Now, I did take a picture, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we're walking towards this thing, and Octavian gets a text.
And I'll explain it from this point, because it was significant to me, because we had the owl go off, and then right around that time, my girlfriend sends me a picture of completely unannounced and unplanned of one of our cats in a collage of owls because she thought the cat looks like an owl. And so I tell Tim, like, oh, hey, Tim, look at this picture. Look at this synchronicity. He looks at it for a second and I'll let Tim tell the rest.
Yeah, I just glanced over literally for like maybe a second or two, turned back to look for whatever it was, and it was gone, just completely gone. So we walked to the area where, roughly where I thought it was. And we found, 6 tree structures about?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. This also happens to be, the reason why I started going to this area is I found it in a BFRO report. There's a really, really intense nighttime encounter there. And I saw it wasn't too far away, so I started going there. And there's a whole saga there of, I don't know how much time we have, but the first time I went there, I found a bunch of, there's a trail that goes through the woods and leads to like a cemetery in the woods.
Okay.
As I was walking through this trail, and this is the first time I'd ever been there, I didn't know where the trail was headed. I'm just walking through the woods. I got this weird feeling. I'm by myself, and I was like, man, I really just felt odd. So I started snapping pictures all around me. And later, I get home and I look at those pictures, and there's something in one of the pictures. Now I don't know what it was. My wife's a pretty big skeptic, and I showed her, and even she was like, "Whoa, somebody was following you."
Strange.
It looks like humanoid shaped, but it looked like it was wearing. I don't know if you're familiar with the Flintstones and
Hmm.
Gazoo, the Great Gazoo.
Yeah.
It looked like he was wearing a green helmet like Gazoo. It's really odd. So I just started calling it Gazoo's Woods. That's where that name comes from, because of this whatever this entity that I photographed. Um, so get to the cemetery, and I found stuffed animals outside of the cemetery in the woods, about 5 feet into the wood line. There's three wooded sides to the cemetery and one kind of open side. So on the three wooded sides, I found these stuffed animals. Really strange. One of them I particularly took note of because I had bought it for my daughter, like, 6 or 8 years previous to that, when she was just a real little kid. I had gotten it as a Valentine's Day, like a very similar one. So I was like, what? That's weird.
Yeah.
Um, we would go back to the cemetery for years and visit, and different stuffed animals would be there. Now, like, not on the graves. Now people think, oh, people leave stuffed animals on graves. This, I promise you, this is not that, because they're positioned around, like, in the wood. It's very odd. It's very, very strange. The strangest thing of all that happened as regards these stuffed animals is, oh well, there's another place we go to in Michaud Forest called Harry Springs, and one of the first times we were there was a stuffed animal at the trailhead. It was a unicorn, or a Pegasus, so the winged
Mhm.
horse. Again, my daughter's favorite stuffed animal. I was like, well, that's weird. She's had it since she was like a toddler. She called it Pony when she was a little kid. It was that stuffed animal. So I was like, that's odd. But then the same one, or the same style, whatever, I don't think it was the exact same one, was at this cemetery, Gazoo's Woods. And now Michaud's in Pennsylvania, you know, Gazoo's Woods in Maryland, they're nowhere near each other. The same animal we found there later on. I'm like, what? This is very weird. But weirder than that, one time, my buddy Chad and I are there, and we're hiking through the woods, and we're coming up on the cemetery. Now, this was daylight, and somebody was out there walking their dog, and it was a pug with a bandana around its neck. And we didn't come out because we didn't want to scare the guy, like, just two weirdos popping out of the woods in the
Sure.
cemetery. So we just kind of waited in the woods till he left. He's done walking his dog, he leaves, and we go out and we look around. Then we go. I said, I'm going to look for stuffed animals. He knows the whole saga, and I'm walking around, and we find the stuffed animal again. It's like 20 yards into the woods, and I'm looking. I was like, dude, look, it's like brand new. So, like, if there are kids playing stuffed animals in the graveyard or whatever game they're playing, I want to meet them, because they've been playing this for 10 years now. But I'm looking, I'm like, wow, it looks brand new. It looks like it was just put here. And Chaz says, Tim, look what kind of stuffed animal it is. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was a pug wearing a bandana around its neck.
Oh, wow.
It was so weird. Like, it was just so this place is odd. It's an odd place. To get back around to the photograph I took with Octavia, when I saw this thing, looked like a Sasquatch. It looked like it was like sitting or kneeling on the ground. I took a photograph because I was like, I'm gonna look at this later. I don't have a good zoom on my phone. It's the worst blob squatch picture you could ever want. Like,
Oh, of course.
yeah. But it, like, you can look at it and go, well, yeah, I guess if I use my imagination, it sort of looks like a Bigfoot kneeling down. I don't know if we ever get to photograph this stuff. I don't know. It's almost like we're not allowed to. I stole
Sure.
that line from Tobe Johnson from what was his show called?
Strange Bow.
Strange Brow. Yeah, I stole that line from Tobe, and so I always try to give him credit when I use it. But I love it. It's almost like we're not allowed to photograph him. But yeah, so it's just a weird place, and there's like weird, just high strangeness kind of mixed in with this Bigfooty stuff there.
So let's kind of we'll back up a little bit, because you're kind of one of your claims to fame is the fact that you talk a lot about these Bigfoot that are there and then they're not, right? So I mean, when did you? Well, first of all, when did you get into Bigfoot?
Oh, I was probably like 6.
Sure.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it as a kid. I was born in 1970, so this was like what the golden age of Bigfoot with In Search of and Legend of Boggy Creek and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Loved it. Never saw anything when I was young, but just loved the idea of Bigfoot. I actually had seen a UFO when I was young, but didn't really. I don't know. I wasn't like obsessed with UFOs, even though I had seen one. I was into Bigfoot, but grew out. Got into you know girls, and
Girls.
punk rock, and
Sure.
whatever else, and kind of came back as an adult when things settled down in my life, and said, what's going on with Bigfoot? Started looking it up and became re-obsessed and dove in. So yeah, it's been a lifelong thing, at least on and off.
So, I mean, how did you personally? Because, I mean, let's be honest here in the Bigfoot community, making that jump from, hey, this is a flesh and blood something to, hey, maybe it's not, that is a big jump. How did you reach that conclusion for yourself?
Yeah, I started off flesh and blood. I think it's sort of a natural place to start. And I'd never fault anybody. I always make a point of saying this. Like, if a hunter is in a tree stand and sees one walk below him in the woods, and he's going to say, no, they're just animals. That's all they are. I don't fault them for saying that. Of course, that's what he saw. What he saw seemed
Right.
like an animal. Somebody has a roadside sighting. Looks like an animal to them. Looks as real as anything else. Of course, they're going to say it's an animal. So I never fault people for saying that. But as I got into this, I found my favorite accounts were these people that were having repeat encounters on their property. These creatures, so they're having many, many encounters with these creatures. They're coming around constantly. And I won't say 100% of the time, but very, very often things get very strange with these people. Um, I will talk to people who have them on their property. Again, it's my favorite thing. I love talking with these witnesses, but I let them tell me all their stories, and then at the end, I start asking questions. And one of the questions I ask is, "What else strange is going on around here?" I haven't had someone tell me nothing. It's always, "Oh, well, my house is haunted," or "Yeah, I see UFOs regularly," whatever else it is. So that got me thinking about it. The other thing is where I live in South Central Pennsylvania, and the number of Bigfoot reports at least I got. It's been kind of slow the past year and a half. I have gotten one recently, but for a while there, it was pretty intense. I was getting quite a few,
Hmm.
and there's no wilderness here, and these reports are coming every time of the year. So the idea that they're nomadic and they're just passing through, it's like, well, where are they coming from and where are they going? Because it's not a seasonal thing.
Sure.
They're seen every time of the year. There's just no breeding population here. There's no place for it. The impact would be evident
Right.
environmentally. So that really made me start thinking of like could these be something else? And the more I looked into that, I just became more and more convinced that there's something else going on here. Now, if they are a natural animal, I will say they are the most gifted natural animal as far as evolution speaks that has ever been and ever will be. They have great intelligence. They have the camouflage, like chameleon abilities. They have super speed, super strength, the ability to hide like nothing else. I mean, all of these incredible evolutionary advantages. It just doesn't work for me as a natural animal. If they have that many evolutionary advantages, they might as well be paranormal because nothing else has that stuff.
That's a fair point. I mean, because you are kind of the guy that really pioneers this. I'm not gonna say pioneers this idea. You are probably one of the very few people that I feel like people take seriously when talking about these subjects. If you're in any way involved in the community whatsoever, you'll see people make these huge claims about these creatures, and everybody just kind of laughs it off. Otherwise, you've kind of decided to really take matters into your own hands and go, no, look, here's the data, and put it together in a better way that I think people that don't usually get involved with the woo can kind of understand. And I appreciate that you do that for people. Um, I'm personally, my personal take on it is that there's a flesh and blood undiscovered species of ape living in North America. However, I think that there are people that do see things that present itself as Bigfoot, and therefore that's what they believe that they have seen, and they are very strange encounters. And I got into it because of the Presque Isle UFO Bigfoot sighting. I'm sure you're familiar with that one.
You have to refresh my memory because there's so many UFO Bigfoot sightings.
That's okay. I believe it's the only Bigfoot encounter that's a part of Project Blue Book. A couple was driving around Presque Isle there in right off Lake Erie in Pennsylvania. They saw a UFO crash land into the woods there. When they stopped, a police car pulled up and actually asked what they were doing, and they told them, "Hey, there's a UFO there." The police accompanied, there were two men and then two women and then some children in the car. The police accompanied the two men to go check out the UFO. They didn't find anything, but when they had gotten back to the car, the women and children were petrified because they said that they were being attacked by a Bigfoot, or the car was being attacked by a Bigfoot.
Wow.
So it is a very interesting, what's the deal with that? Is there, I mean, it's hard to think that somebody saw Bigfoot and a UFO at the same time unless they're directly related to each other.
Well, yeah,
With,
that's
And
one of my points with all this is so as far as Bigfoot sightings go, we have footprints, which are wonderful,
mhm,
and they're great evidence. But how did they hunt ghosts in the 1950s? They would put powder down and watch footprints appear. So the idea that something other can't leave footprints is it's that's out the window.
sure.
But this witness testimony we have, and science doesn't tend to like witness testimony because
No.
any single witness is not reliable. However, we have a canon of witness testimony that goes back as far as these newspaper reports I've collected to the 1800s and before, of people reporting the same behavior. So if this isn't one person saying I saw something and maybe they saw a bear, this is hundreds and hundreds of people over the course of hundreds of years saying these things act like this. They
Right.
attack dogs. They knock on windows and knock on the wall at night. They do this. They do that, et cetera, et cetera. This behavior, and that's what started to convince me. Like, no, there's something to this. There's something to this. This behavior denotes something that people are seeing. However, witness testimony is often thrown out the window when somebody hears something they don't like. Uh, Bigfoot people don't like UFOs. So all of I was told when I got into this by some well-meaning Bigfoot people that, oh, the weird stuff barely ever happens. There are a couple Bigfoot and UFO sightings, but there's not really that many. Just don't ignore it. No, there's a ton of them. There's a ridiculous amount of them.
Hmm.
Where people see Bigfoot and UFO either at the same time or around the same time, same place. So if you're going to believe somebody when they say they saw Bigfoot, and then say, well, they didn't know what they were seeing when they saw a UFO, that's not real honest. I mean, they say they saw one weird thing, you got to believe when they saw the other weird thing. If
and
First Nations people tell you these beings exist, and I know like a lot of flesh and blood people, they love to use First Nations names. They call them this, they call them that, and they said they existed. Yeah, but what else do they say about them? They
Yeah.
say they have magic powers, or they say they were spirit beings, or there's not a monolithic belief. Now, some First Nations tribes absolutely say they're just like us. They're just people. They're hairy people in the woods. But many of them will say, well, yeah, they're hairy people in the woods, but they have magic powers, and they do this and do that, or they're spirit beings, et cetera, et cetera. So people aren't, I take it holistically, and I think some people are taking it piecemeal, which supports their theory. They're like, okay, I'll take that little bit, but I'm going to ignore the other thing.
And Tim, I wanted to ask you on that point. In your show and in your books, you talk a lot about this checklist that you have when it comes to paranormal phenomena, especially when it comes to Bigfoot. Maybe you could go through that checklist on what it is that makes a Bigfoot case weird versus just an animal.
Well, I mean, I always ask, like I said, what else weird is going on? I ask about, well, I always ask if there's a creek nearby, and this might be because Pennsylvania has a ton of creeks, but I've never been told no, there's not a creek nearby. There's usually a creek nearby. I've started to ask because so many of the places we've been to have been where people are digging into the ground with mines or quarries or this or that. I've started to ask about where are people digging into the ground, and that is a big one. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, there's a quarry right over the hill, or there's a rumor of a lost mine here, or there's a rumor of buried treasure. So you get that a lot too. So that's another one. Geographically, we look at magnetic anomalies. Magnetic anomalies are
Mhm.
pretty big with this stuff, which you can get magnetic anomaly maps from I think it's the USGS. Very interesting to look at the sighting clusters versus magnetic anomalies. Very, very interesting overlay to do. So I might be leaving stuff out, Octavian. Am I missing anything?
No, I think you got it. And yeah, I would agree that all those things are hallmarks of these paranormal Bigfoot encounters. The other thing that you seem to come up against a lot is you will go out and investigate what you think is maybe a ghost encounter or a haunting, and then you end up with these kind of Bigfoot like um, behavior and entities. What I'm mainly talking about is your experiences with the Eisenhower. The Eisenhower Bridge in Gettysburg. I wonder if you could go into that a little bit.
Well, um, that's that bridge is in the middle of a cluster of Bigfoot sightings anyway. And the way I heard about it originally was from a bunch of ghost hunters that said, "Yeah, we went out. This place is really scary. Something was banging on the bridge." I'm like, "What?" like, like, yeah, we couldn't see it. It was like just banging on the bridge really hard. So, I mean, that could be poltergeist stuff. It doesn't have to be Bigfoot, but it sort of got my attention. And we went out there, and one of the first witnesses we talked to, they were describing this ghostly entity that sure did sound like a Bigfoot. It was giant. I think it was. I forget if they said it was gray or I think it was gray or white, but it was hairy. Uh, you know, Huge, bigger than me. I'm 6 foot. He said it was like 7 foot or something. He's using his hands to suggest the size. As wide as Chad and I standing next to each other. It's this big, wide thing, and then the other witnesses we had there are seeing these big, 7 foot tall shadows, like darker than the night, walk across the trails there and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's but they're all ghost hunters, so they're all saying
Right.
they're big hairy ghosts. So maybe they were. Who am I to say? But yeah,
Sounds like a
definitely.
Scooby Doo villain almost.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like Bigfooty stuff. But
Right. It's very interesting. Wow. It is interesting that you say that because we do have a local area here that I've personally spent a lot of time in, but not as an investigator. Actually, more as just a teenager that liked to joyride a lot. And some of the stories out there, obviously there's a bridge, of course, there's a haunted bridge. There's a Bigfoot, and there's also a dog man in that area. And that's kind of picked up a lot of steam here lately because Dogman seems to be the hot topic nowadays.
yeah,
But
he's the big meanie.
yeah, yeah, he's the big meanie. He's definitely rivaling Bigfoot in popularity almost. I mean,
Yeah.
gosh, he's really grown. But yeah, and back then I used to think that I'd go out there for the spooky bridge, and every time I had been out there, we had paranormal experiences. But I'm like, oh, Bigfoot, that's cool. And then I'm like, Bigfoot and Dogman. But now that I've gotten kind of a little more well versed on these topics, I don't think it sounds that crazy, actually. For all those things, I mean, I think that tracks all these things happening in one area
Yeah.
that are all very strange.
Yeah,
I,
I'm not surprised. When I started Strange Familiars, I was really kind of like, I'd have people on like, yeah, no, I've seen ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs, and at first I was kind of like, that is that a thing? And then, but over time, I've come to realize it's like kind of is a thing. I mean,
Yeah.
people tend to have multiple experiences. It's not as rare as you might imagine.
Right. Well, actually, I do find that to be the case most of the time when you talk to people is that they, might come to you to report one thing, and then the more you kind of talk to these people, the more you realize that they've actually had other experiences,
Yeah,
and
very common.
wow, and they're wildly different from each other. It's not just, oh yeah, I've been haunted my entire life. It's like, oh, I've been haunted. Also, I see UFOs. It's
Yeah,
usually that is the case. So, like I said, I don't think that's. I think that actually tracks. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, what is the difference then? Between the phenomena, like, let's say, well, I'll make it an easy one. What's the difference between the Bigfoot phenomena and say the Mothman phenomena?
hmm. I have a hard time not seeing them all as somehow connected. Now I don't know how it's connected,
Sure.
but it just seems they're all so weird. There's so much weirdness with this stuff that to me it just, and this is my gut. Like I have no proof that they're connected. They just feel connected. They just feel like there's so much similar stuff. The Class B Bigfoot encounter and the poltergeist is like a 1-to-1 comparison.
Right.
Bad smells, rocks being thrown. People with poltergeist encounters have rocks thrown in their house. They'll pick them up and they'll be warm in their house. So people pick them up and they're warm in the woods. They're like, oh, Bigfoot was holding it. He warmed up the stone.
Sure.
Unknown language, screams and feelings of intense fear. This stuff is all 1-to-1 comparison. Bigfoot, and if it's in the woods, it's Bigfoot. If it's in your house, it's a poltergeist. Sarai from Where Did the Road Go has a great thing where he says, you see lights in your house, strange lights in your house as it goes. You see strange lights in the woods, it's Bigfoot. Strange lights in the sky, it's a UFO. They're all strange lights. It's a great point. But yeah, it's just very, very difficult for me to see that they're not related. Mothman has because of the Mothman prophecies, it has this sort of
stigma. I know.
yeah, like this like portent of doom kind of thing, which I don't necessarily think that's what it is. I think there was some odd stuff going on with in West Virginia at that time, and I think it ended badly, right, with the bridge collapse. That's a bad
just
thing.
A little bit, yeah.
But I don't think, like with Chicago, it hasn't panned out that way, and I know there's a lot of people like to kind of poop on the Chicago sightings, but they're having talked to or had access at least to some of the witnesses on that. There's a lot of good witnesses there, and there's a lot of people that are upset that they haven't had access to those witnesses. I believe that's what's going on there. So they're just kind of poo-pooing the whole thing. But Mothman hasn't panned. That's been going on for years now in Chicago, and there's not been any. It's horrible disaster there. People have seen Mothman other places over time, and bad things haven't happened necessarily. I'm sure so somebody can point out something, but so yeah, what is that? Mothman feels weirder just because it seems less likely that there'd be a winged thing, so it feels even more paranormal, I guess.
Yeah, I say it all the time. There's no Mothman nests. You're not going to find
right,
ones.
yeah.
And but with those cases, because Mothman to me is like Bigfoot to you, and so when what I mean by that is in the most sincere way possible, as far as having my own very strange experiences with the phenomena. And so when you look at those cases, they have a lot of poltergeist activity involved. Linda Scarberry ended up having poltergeist activity her entire life after they saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that you hear about happening after encountering these strange creatures, whatever they are. Why do you think that is? I mean, in my case, I feel like I find most of the time they see the creature first, and then it kind of seems to follow other weird happenings. What's your opinion on that?
That does seem often to be the case, right? And
not always, but most of the time. Yeah.
And it's like, in the Bigfoot world, they'll say like, once you see one, then you know how to look for him or something like, something like this. And I mean, maybe it's more like what you're saying. Maybe that's like, it kicks it off. Like you see one and that kicks off the strangeness in your life. And
I've always said it's kind of like an initiation.
Maybe. Yeah.
They're testing the water, see if you can handle it. Maybe. They're like, did they run away from this completely? Did it ruin their lives? No. Okay, they can have some more.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you're just opening a door to the weirdness, and it's like, okay. It's often like people talk about, we have a lot on Strange Familiars, these people with these sleep paralysis leading to these entity encounters and so forth, and sleep paralysis is a scientifically explainable thing, but there's also weirdness that goes with it. And I've likened it to like, maybe, again, no proof, but maybe you're sort of setting off a beacon when you're in that state, and these other things from wherever they are can see that beacon and go, oh, okay, there's somebody I can mess with, and they roll in and they mess with people.
Sure. Kind of like that old if you look into the void, it looks back type of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So maybe a very similar thing happens in a much more sort of visceral way when people are in a fully awake state, and that just kicks stuff off for them. Maybe these things like the Eye of Sauron, right? I've likened paranormal stuff to that many times. It's like you put on the ring and that big eye turns and looks at you, goes, "Okay, all right, I see you."
and we're all nerds, so we all know what you're talking about, so it's fine. But I think that I don't know. I think that is probably our best guess right now. So
Mhm.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. Do you get a lot of flack for these theories that you have?
Um, Not really. I think because in the end, I'll just like I can't. What am I gonna say? If you fully say like no, it's flesh and blood, well, I can't prove it's not. Like I
Sure,
just have my theories as much as anybody else. I have my suspicions that I'll never get invited to speak at certain events because of my
sure.
position on this. Because certain people are very married to flesh and blood theory, and
Mhm.
they don't want any other opinions out there. Why I don't know, but that's what it is. I mean, that's I'm just being writing from what I feel is intellectually honest point of view as far as where I come from. I'm not saying this is the smart belief. I'm just saying like this is the way I feel. This is what I think.
Sure.
So generally people, I think honestly when I wrote Where the Footprints End with Josh, um, and I said like this is a book that should have been written 20 or 30 years before we wrote it. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that it didn't already exist, honestly. um I think it first of all got a really really good reception. I think people were kind of waiting for it, and I think um it gives people at least another way to look at things, because we weren't silly about it. We weren't oh, Bigfoot is definitely from dimension Z, and he comes here leading an army of grays and
Sure.
whatever. We're just presenting like, hey, this is what happens, and these are all from Bigfoot encounters, and they are like these other encounters. So let's look at what Bigfoot encounters have in common with ghost encounters, look what they have in common with fairy encounters, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people were, I don't know, ready, if they were ready for it or something like that. But we got less pushback than we thought we would. The nastiness we got tends to come from people that were pretty entrenched in that flesh and blood world, and don't like anything kind of shaking the foundations of it at all.
And the one thing that I really love about what you're doing is that it either has set off or it has very much complemented this overarching movement of looking at the Fortean from this holistic perspective. What you do with Bigfoot as far as the folklore goes and these other phenomena, and then you have your involvement somewhat with Hellier and what they were doing with the paranormal and magic and things like that. And both those things were heavily influential on me and my show about looking at the paranormal and encrypted phenomena alongside the occult. And so that's something that I think you have really brought to the table in a big way.
it's it's hard to disconnect this stuff. It again, it just feels to me it's all connected. I mean, my journey through the paranormal led me back to the Catholic Church. That's a weird course.
Oh,
I've done speeches on it at Catholic churches, and people are like blown away by this. But that's where it took me, and I'm not saying other people should, or people have their own paths they need to follow. Some things hum, some things do not hum. People gotta follow what hums for them, and this is what hums for me. But looking at these saint stories of these, which saints are surrounded by paranormal phenomena. My other podcast, The Flower Path, it just looks at these stories of saints. But you can, again, there's a checklist you can go through, and the same phenomena surrounds them, that surrounds these other paranormal events. They're looking at it through the lens of Catholicism, but the commonality is there. It's there. So you can find it in the occult, you can find it in folklore, you can find it in these stories of the saints, and it seems like different languages for the same things, and maybe as my great friend and frequent guest on Strange Familiars, Brother Richard, says, it's like they're using the same channels to get the information through.
And I think that's a I think it's interesting to bring that perspective because let's be honest, a lot of this perspective plays a huge role in. Look, if you had written a book about gosh, I don't know anything else. I mean, Chupacabra and the paranormal. Nobody would have batted an eye. If
Mm-hmm.
you would have written another Mothman prophecies, Mothman mixed in with all this other stuff, nobody would have cared. It's the fact that you made it Bigfoot, and I think that's what made people pay attention to it. It's the fact that you were able to shift that perspective because you could realistically just about, in my opinion, you could just about replace Bigfoot with any other creature, and it tracks, like you said, checklist, it's all there. But it's because you did it on Bigfoot that I think people really started talking about it, because I don't know, for whatever reason, that kind of, you got a lot of people in conventional scientific communities that could kind of buy the idea of Bigfoot. Somebody shared to my wall today on Facebook about Jane Goodall and how she accepted the possibility of Bigfoot and things like that. um but nobody was looking at it. Nobody was looking at these other collections of sightings that just kind of get filed away to whatever you want to call it. People, some people call them crazy. Some people call it, hoax, just whatever it is. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important that you were able to bridge that gap, because I don't think that we as a community were ever going to make any progress without having somebody willing to bridge that gap. So I think you're right. Yeah, the book should have been written 20 years ago, but it's here now, thankfully.
Yeah, yeah. And look, if somebody rolls a Bigfoot into a lab one day, or puts one in a zoo, I'm going to be happy. Trust me. I'm just like, I would be like psyched about that. Not that one would be hurt, or have
Sure.
freedom taken away, but
We need to get Wes to give us the one that's in his garage.
exactly. There you go. But you know, it hasn't happened yet. And you know, look at Ape Canyon is one of my favorite examples.
Sure.
Before I dug into it, Ape Canyon was used on every Bigfoot podcast everywhere as an example of a Bigfoot attack. Nothing strange going on here. Guy shot a Bigfoot. They came back and attacked the cabin at night. When you look at that story from the witness's perspective, the things they saw, including footprints in the middle of a sandbar, that, muddy sandbar, 3 footprints, nothing, no other footprints around it. The quote was, looks like it dropped out of the sky and then got picked up again. Strange machinery noises coming from the ground. A ports. The guy had a pen or a pencil, a port into his hand from his house. They followed a ghost through the woods. This ghost they called Vander White. They followed it. That led them to the gold mine. Again, gold mine. They're digging in the ground there. There was a lot of strangeness that was never reported. It was always just like, it's an intense Bigfoot encounter. They attacked the cabin. The other thing is, when they got up in the morning, there were footprints around the cabin. They were all left footprints. There was no right footprint around there. These things don't get reported. There's weirdness with this case. And I was like, boy, that's just a cover-up. The fact that no one talked about that that happened in the 20s.
Right.
And, the guy talked about in his own book that he wrote about it in the 1960s, but that was buried, and to bring that out, I was like, wow, Ape Canyon was very strange. Very, very strange.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that about Ape Canyon. And I mean, not that I'm a Bigfoot expert or anything, but
The story was told 100 times on podcasts,
right.
and in every book about Bigfoot ever, and never until I found, I'm blanking on the guy's name, Fred something, until I found his account that he wrote with his son in the 1960s about it. I was like, wow, this is all new stuff. This is all new stuff.
I feel like it's always a Fred. I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe there's something to that. We just did the Braxy anniversary episode, Flatwoods Monster. That was a Ed and Fred May. So I just saying.
That's a weird one, right?
That is a weird one.
Yeah.
that is weird. And much like the Mothman story, much like all these stories, a lot of the other strange happenings surrounding not just that encounter, but surrounding it was very weird. I mean, and people don't even know. They don't even know the details.
Yeah.
They just know
happening in West Virginia around that time, right? That was like,
well, I think that just happens. I think that's just West Virginia, all the time. But not shortly after, or Yeah, I think it was not shortly after. Then you had the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins happening over in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very strange area. I'm in Ohio, so I know.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all of these. There's like a cluster of strangeness. And so of course people look at the demographic. Clearly, you have, like you said, digging in the ground, things like that. I don't think that that's a bad idea. But there is something to be said for these stories not being told correctly. And even as somebody who does a weekly podcast where typically I don't usually have guests on the show, I'll be honest with you. This is, I have lately, but normally I do a topic and, just even trying to research one topic in a week, it's not enough time.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not enough time.
Yeah, it is hard.
yeah, it's
You
super
know,
hard.
it just doesn't. That's why the interviews are easier. I should
Absolutely.
do more guests.
Yeah.
But because you're just not going to get all the information. You're going to hear it from different sources, and unless you can go straight to the horse's mouth, in a lot of these cases you can't because they're dead now.
Yep.
You're just going to get what you get, and it takes a minute to find those original reports, and really really deep dive them. So
Yeah,
I
when
had
we did
something.
those Witch Cloud episodes, the bridge in Gettysburg that Octavian referenced before, it was 2 years of research before we published a single episode on that.
Yeah,
And the did a book with it. The book's pretty thin, like there's but it that represents 2 years of both boots on the
yeah,
ground and book and library research and newspaper research and everything.
yeah.
It's not if you want to do a good job, it's not easy. It's
No,
yeah.
it's
No,
well,
it's not.
it's not hard, but it's very tedious, and a lot of people I don't think understand exactly what go into something like that. You can't just pull up a Wikipedia page and go, "Well, this is it."
Right.
It
Yeah,
doesn't work
it
that way.
has it requires a lot of dedication that just your average layman is not going to have when it
Yeah,
comes to these really niche topics.
yeah, of course. I mean, listen, you guys have absolutely no idea how much time we spent on trying to learn the history of the railway system going through Point Pleasant. I don't think anybody will ever quite understand that, and how it's still incomplete because there's like 20 years where there's nothing and we're
Interesting.
just exhausted. It is. I have so much. It's very interesting.
That's the kind of stuff though I can get like in the weeds about. I would like I'll get off track on something like that and just be like, oh, I need to find out everything about trains now.
Right. Wow, this works. What they were doing.
And then
Um,
and then I'll still state that like all that research in the way we still missed a major story, right? After
right.
2 years of research that in some future volume I have to go back and add another story because I still missed a major story after all that research.
Well, I was telling a really good friend of mine lately, who they were doing well, I guess I could say it now. Tobias Whalen's doing a book about high strangeness surrounding holidays. And I had somebody come forward to me telling me that this was just kind of a casual conversation we were having. We were talking about how somebody saw Starlink on Christmas Eve and thought it was Santa. And, so we were talking about that, and I was like, "Hey, I don't know if you've had any reports of this, but like that could be a thing." And he's like, "Oh yeah, that could be a thing, maybe, but I've already done the book. The book's set to come out." And I was like, "Well, buddy, that's what sequels are for."
That's a really good point and a really interesting topic, and one that Timothy could probably speak on because Tim, you've talked about this space of time that starts at the autumn equinox and ends around. Well, I mean, it goes on into February and March, but this space of time that is so poignant for weird things.
It's well Halloween through spring equinox or so is I usually call it time of the wild man because historically there's an intense amount of at least folkloric accounts of wild man throughout that time. I mean, Santa was a wild man. Like
Oh yeah.
you trace him back, he was a wild man. But all this intense activity surrounding Christmas, yeah, it's one of my favorite times of the year. It's not all saccharine sweet. There's for hundreds of years we told ghost stories at Christmas. That certainly
Yes.
faded since Coca-Cola Santa Claus.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right? I wish we still told scary stories around the Yule log, but we.
Right.
I
I
guess they
love
could
that
always
Yeah.
bring
stuff
it
so much.
back.
Like the whole folkloric side of that stuff. It's just it's such a rich, beautiful history that hopefully, I think people are getting back to it a little bit with these like Krampus nights events and
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a horror element that is creeping back into the Christmas time in general, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm interested to read his book and see what he's got. He came on the show and actually he did a Christmas special with me. And it was just, we kind of talked about obviously the checkered dark history of Santa Claus and other things surrounding the holiday. But he had told he had a Santa Claus report, a Santa Claus sighting, and I think that that's super interesting because they're out there. They exist.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Um,
I've had a number of Easter Bunny sightings on the show. Some of them very sinister. Kids wake up and see, a 7-foot bunny. It's a very very sinister kind of thing. So I think a number of cartoon character sightings too, where people are like, yeah, there was like a cartoon
yep.
mouse that was like beckoning me under the trailer or something like that when I was a kid. It's like, well, that's super creepy. Like whatever's
Yeah.
taken that form, like they were up to no good.
Yeah. No, thank you. That is interesting. I believe I had an Easter bunny encounter.
Oh,
I
really?
didn't see it, but yeah, I do. I was obviously a child. We were free to wake up in the morning and go find our Easter baskets that were hidden somewhere in the house. And I had looked in our closet in our dining room and it wasn't there. So I went to the living room and my parents weren't awake. They weren't up. And it was all very open. So like the living room and dining room were pretty much connected. And so I went to the living room and then I came back and I noticed that the closet door was open. So I checked the closet door and there's the baskets. But again, there was nobody else. It was just me. My parents weren't there. So I didn't actually see the Easter bunny, but it was very strange.
Hmm.
It was really weird. So I don't know. What am I going to do? Ask my mother about it now, 20, 20, 30 years later. Hey, did you somehow sneak downstairs and move the Easter baskets? I mean, she doesn't remember. So it's just weird when you're a kid. You don't really, I mean, you think, hey, the Easter bunny just showed up. I just missed him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's your thought process. So,
And
um,
we had a series of what we term bunny man sightings on the show too. I haven't had one in a long time. I love these where people are seeing, now they're humans dressed as rabbits,
yeah.
but outside of Easter and in very strange situations. My good friend
Hmm.
John had one. They were just driving down this country road and they look over and they see this. So this is very near to my house where he saw this. They see this guy in a bunny outfit sitting in a chair in the middle of a field waving at them. And he said, yeah, he was illuminated from above. And my first question was, I know this field. I said, what was lighting him up, John? And he said, I don't remember.
Oh,
So he was like really
neat.
kind of upset by that part of it. He's like, I don't remember. I don't remember. But his whole family remembers seeing this like weird guy in a bunny outfit waving to them. We had a slew of these, like just weird. A lot of people would just be in a store and they'd see like weird guy in a bunny outfit that would take notice of them and like sort of focus on them. And they said nobody else seemed to be noticing this guy in a bunny costume.
Sure.
Very strange stuff, but I love those stories.
It reminds me a lot of the clown sightings.
Yeah,
I'm sure you're
yeah,
familiar.
very
That's
similar to that. Yeah.
very similar. Yeah.
Those were the best. I really reveled in that whole part of 2016, 2017. When it came back a few years ago, it did not have the same zest that it originally did. So I wasn't that interested in the new sightings that have been coming out. But that time period, for some reason, was a really magical time.
I agree. It was 2016 was an interesting time. That's when I had my Mothman sighting. It's interesting that you say that, because it was a very, I don't know, just a very strange time. But hey, the cloud sightings happened previously. I think in the late 80s, early 90s. So if we give it another, 20, 30 years, maybe we'll see it happen again.
Hopefully. And 2016 is when you put out your first book, Tim. Am I correct in that?
Yeah,
I may be wrong.
that's kicked it off, and then like right in early 2017, I started Strange Familiar. So yeah, that was kind of a magical time for me as well.
It's
Um,
crazy what you don't know at the time, and then you're like, oh my god, it just all seems so ordinary.
yeah, Ashley, you brought up the checkered past of Santa Claus, and that brings us to a really good thing about Tim and his the Flannel Man and the explorations that you've done on that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, that was just, I mean, it was so neat the way it happened because my wife had had seen one of these entities. She woke up. Um, this is before we were married. We were staying at her parents' house, and she woke me up screaming one night. And I said, what is it? And she said she'd seen this guy in this big lumberjack looking guy standing at our feet, looking down at us. And she doesn't remember if he was holding an axe or if she sort of like put the axe in his hand in memory because he looked like a lumberjack. But I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't read Mothman Prophecies at this time. So John Keel, I didn't make this stuff up. John Keel mentions these entities long before I did.
Sure.
So some years went by, and I was on some high strangeness type website in the earlier days of the internet, and somebody was talking about this, what they called flannel man, and I was reading. I was like, wow, that's what my wife saw, and I didn't tell my wife because she's a scaredy cat and sleeps with the light on anyway. I didn't want to spook her anymore. But when we started the podcast, I was at some point talking about my experiences and how much more common it is for people to have weird stuff happen than maybe people think. And I said, well, even my wife, the skeptic, has had something. And I mentioned this Flannel Man account. And then just immediately we started getting these people telling us like, oh, I've seen this entity as well. It's not this. It doesn't seem to be the same guy because they'll describe different people. It's usually a man. I have had flannel woman accounts as well. And it's usually red and black buffalo plaid, but I have had plenty of other colors as well, blue plaid, green plaid, etc. But people see these guys or these entities, these people wearing these flannel shirts in weird situations. It's not always like my wife. It often is where they'll wake up and they'll see it. And my wife said he looked surprised. He looked shocked that she could see him. People describe that a lot. But often people, like, oh, I was on a ghost hunt and this just weird guy in plaid like came up and said something weird or warned us, we should get out of there, whatever the case may be. So sometimes they're definitely in waking life. It's not always people, with these like my wife's thing where she woke up and he was in the bedroom. So very, very interesting, very strange, and a lot of them. There's a lot of accounts of this, and like I said, Keel noted it, and other people have noted it in the past. What they are, again, I don't know. I've got a book started on that, but it's a long way off. I've what to say about it. Other than I can list hundreds of encounters with it, but sort of tying them together is the difficult part because my theory keeps changing. Maybe they're sort of messengers, maybe they're harbingers. Sometimes I think they're sort of like a half a wild man, like Bigfoot's the wild man, and this guy's like sort of in between, the lumberjack entity. But I don't know.
I always thought the really cool thing regarding the flannel man was the sort of Men in Black version for Bigfoot, where one of them is wearing, kind of a lumberjack style.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. The number of Bigfoot, especially in intense encounters all over the country for years and years and years, people would report these two guys showing up, and they said one of them was dressed like, in a business suit or, dressed nicely, and this other guy they described like a big bearded guy. Like some people would describe him as a biker, but they'd always say he was wearing a flannel shirt, and he'd be really intimidating and basically, do the Man in Black thing. Like you didn't see anything. You didn't see Bigfoot. Lots of encounters with that guy. Very, very creepy.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. Back in, and I'm trying to find the photo, and I'm having a hard time. It was like the end of 2021 ish. A photo had emerged of somebody claiming to have taken a photo of a Bigfoot on their property, and it was carrying something. It was at night. So it's, you don't really see much. Well, when you take that photo and you invert the colors on it, what you end up seeing is a little piece of cloth hanging off of this giant entity. It looks like it is potentially carrying a young deer or something. But the cloth that's hanging off of it is flannel.
Wow.
The flannel pattern.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll find that picture for you. I'll send it to you because initially it was people it was we were on a private chat and they inverted the colors, and that's where that all came from. um
That's amazing. Wow.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at first we're like, well, Bigfoot doesn't wear flannel, right? So it's fake, obviously, right? But
I
like,
mean, there are a couple accounts where witnesses will say he was wearing a torn up flannel shirt.
yeah.
Very odd stuff. Very, very odd stuff, but you can find them, you know?
Yeah, I'll find that picture. I'll send it to you. It was a while. I've been looking in my phone trying to find it now. I don't see it, but I know where I can get it. So I will hunt that down, because yeah, that is interesting that you say that. 'Cause, whatever else it is, you really can't. I mean, it's just a large shape. You really can't make out anything else. But when you invert those colors, sure enough, there's a piece of flannel.
Yeah.
This
Yeah. We
body.
had one account on the show. The guy was, I mean, it sounded like it was going to be a Bigfoot encounter. This guy's telling the story. And, I believe it was his father's story he was relating. And I think they had some sort of car problem, or maybe they just stopped. It was like a double date kind of thing. They might have just stopped to drink beer or something. They're on a country road and they hear something coming down the road. Uh, you know, big heavy footfalls. And at first they're like, what's going on here? And then I guess they got scared and they hopped in the car. And I feel like it's been a long time since the episode aired, but I think it picked the back end of the car up, whatever it was. So they're trying to drive
Wow.
away, and they've got no rear end traction. And they looked in the mirror, and I'm expecting him to say, he looked in the rearview mirror and he saw this big hairy thing. No, he says, so he looked in the rearview mirror and all he saw was buffalo plaid flannel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And there is an association with flannel and well, lumberjacks who happen to pioneer a lot of the folklore that we have. There's also an association in pop culture to flannel and werewolves.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So man, maybe it means nothing, right? Maybe it means something. I don't know. I think it's wise to take note of it, though.
Mm-hmm.
That there is kind of potentially that connection. Very interesting stuff. So, how did you go from Bigfoot to now hermits?
Um, there is a connection there, but it's an odd one. My wife collects photography, and at the time I was writing these historical Bigfoot books, where they didn't call them Bigfoot back in the day; they called them wild men.
Sure.
And one day she plopped this photo down on my desk that she had bought me. And it was a photo of a hermit. She's like, "Here, he looks like a wild man. You'll like him." And I set it on my desk, and it sat there for probably 3 or 4 months. And eventually, I just had some time in a day, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to look this guy up." His name was William Woodruff, and I typed him in, and he was in Colebrook River, Connecticut, which is now the town's under the water of a reservoir now. But it was an old town. He lived outside of that. He was a hermit. And I'm reading this guy's story. It's really, really interesting. He basically lost the love of his life, took a vow of silence, and went off and lived alone. And he would grow hollyhock flowers around his house. And anybody who passed his house, he would give them a hollyhock. Very, very kind of sweet, interesting story.
Hmm.
He eventually died in a house fire. And the romanticized version of the story is he was holding a daguerreotype of his old photo of the love of his life, and just burned up in the flames. That's not exactly what happened, but it's a sweet legend about the man.
Sure.
But as I'm reading his story, at one point I come across the stories of the Winstead Wild Man, which is the next town over to this guy. In fact, this guy would walk into Winstead every now and then. And the Winstead Wild Man was certainly a Bigfoot from the description of the creature and the number of encounters and so forth. People were shooting at it to no effect, and whole carriages of people saw this big hairy thing. But one of the accounts of the Winstead Wild Man was not a Bigfoot. It was this guy, William Woodruff, walked out of the woods and scared the heck out of people because they thought, this is during the Wild Man flap. So they thought it was him. So that was, he was taken for a Bigfoot. He wasn't, but very, very interesting connection there. So when I told his story on the podcast, I got to weave in the Winstead Wild Man story, which is fun for me. But that began it. I sort of fell in love with this guy's story, and I started collecting other photographs of these hermits from around the same time and learning their stories. And we do, a few times a year, we'll do a hermit story on the show. And then I started visiting them. Last year I got to visit William Woodruff's grave, and I planted a hollyhock on it. I don't know if it's still there, but hopefully it is. so I got to visit his grave. I could not find his cabin. It was like 100 degrees the day I was there, so I really
Sure.
couldn't do much exploring. It was a brutal day, but I did get to, a few days later, there's another hermit in Athol, Massachusetts. I went up. I got to see his cave. His cave is still there. You can hike to it. I got to that. So I did a whole like hermit road trip last year, which was a lot of fun. I ended up finding, there was a hermit in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and I ended up finding the at least the footprint of where his cabin was, based on he had hand dug a well, and I found the footprint of the cabin and a hand dug well right next to it. They mentioned it in the articles about him. Plus, he lived in a cave for a while. I found the cave he stayed in as well. So it's become a super fun pursuit for me, and I just love these guys. They all have such interesting stories. So I thought, well, I've collected these photos, and they're always really interesting photos of these guys. So I'm doing a book. It's sort of based on my photo collection. So you get to see a photo of the guy, and then I tell their story, and I do a illustration for each one as well.
Interesting. Well, and there's certainly a lot of a lot of lore surrounding hermits in general. The the first one I think of when I think of like a hermit is the Bender family, the the cannibalistic serial killer tribe of family that we don't even think that they actually killed and ate anybody at all, because we just know so little about them. But everybody in the area, I mean, they know that story, and to them this was a sadistic inbred family who was kidnapping villagers and eating them,
Wow.
and that's not probably true.
Right, right, yeah.
They may have killed some people robbing them, but we don't really know, just because there's no real, good solid written record about them. So I mean, folklore in general surrounding these people, I can definitely see it. And the case of the wild man is interesting, because it does vary from just feral humans, all the way to Bigfoot. So
yeah, I'm going back as part of the patron episodes for Strange Familiars right now. I'm going back through those historical accounts in my book Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. And at the time, I kind of had Bigfoot on the brain, and I think I read a lot more of those as Bigfoot. And now looking back, I'm like, nah, these are either feral people or something else. They're still interesting. They're very interesting stories, but fewer of them in the book are Bigfoot than I initially thought. At least that's my opinion now. But they're still strange. That's the thing. Like, a lot of these stories are still odd.
One thing I've never actually asked you, Tim, is you've done a lot of work with looking at Bigfoot encounters from pre-1900s, and I'm curious about where that started for you, looking at these accounts from the 1800s.
When I was writing Beyond the Seventh Gate, I was just looking for anything, local legends and stuff. Just doing the heavy research as regards to Toad Road, and finding some of these old stories, these old newspaper stories, and I thought, wow, these are really interesting. And I just thought, well, I wonder if there's any more out there. So I just started initially just looking in Pennsylvania, and just the number I found was like, wow, there's an incredible amount of these. So that's what started it. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Well, they've got plenty of area in Pennsylvania, to go live off of. So that's not. But even like Nahanni Valley, one of the it could either be a Bigfoot out there decapitating these people, or it could be a tribe of feral people.
Right. Yeah. And there was a very interesting story, and I forget what podcast it's on. It's been a few years back, where somebody was talking about some park ranger somewhere along the Appalachian Trail, in the southern part of the Appalachian Trail, and he warned people about feral humans, and they're like, "Oh, you mean Bigfoot?" He's like, "No, these are feral humans," and he said basically he was like, they're out there, and be very careful. So it's, I again forget the source of the story, but I found it very, very interesting.
I've been warned about feral humans in West Virginia.
Wow.
Actually. So it's not, and I'm just like, yeah, I haven't seen any yet. I've also been warned about satanic cults a lot, and I haven't found those either.
Yeah,
I look for them.
The satanic cult thing it's really interesting, because and another folklorist noted this, and I found it to be true. He says, if you go back and look at these sites, if you go back far enough, a lot of the places, the legends have changed over time. So it's like, oh yeah, the satanic cult activity happens there. But if you go back to the 50s and look at the legends about the same place, it'll be like, oh, the KKK met there and they
Yeah.
hanged somebody, or whatever, did something horrible there. So it sort of changes over time. It depends what the sort of cultural boogeyman is, I think.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that started my show. Was I kept hearing all these times about these, this place is haunted because of a satanic group, or cult that doing rituals there. And I wanted to know, like, okay, well, what rituals are they actually doing? How does that actually correlate to the haunting? And I found very little evidence to support any kind of actual legitimate magical undertakings going on where these hauntings were happening.
The satanic panic was a real thing. I lived through it.
Mhm.
And elements of it are still around today, and it's a very yucky kind of thing.
Yes. I've had researchers now say that they've come across these cults, and I'm like, what? Really? I mean, listen, if they're making activity happen, I'd like their phone number, Let's
Yeah,
let's
same.
document this stuff. Let's get proof. But I haven't personally come across any. Like I said, I've had colleagues say that they have. Have they, or did they just come across a group of edgy teenagers?
Right, right, yeah.
I don't know. Or even feral people. Shoot, why not?
Yeah, I
You
mean, I
know.
think some, yeah, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
But if you're out there and you think, that someone in a black t-shirt is worshiping the devil, if you see some Wiccans, that's a satanic cult, right?
Right.
If or maybe just had no exposure to that, and oh, that's Satanism. Well, no, it's not. It's not. But yeah, who knows? I can't say what
Oh my
people think.
God. Now that you mention it, people may have mistaken me and my people out there for a satanic cult. Much like John Keel was mistaken for the Men in Black in Point Pleasant.
Yeah, I
I
was
think that
when I first moved to Pennsylvania, I was told the town we lived in was filled with hippies and Satanists, and I think, first of all, it wasn't. There was a
sure.
couple around, the hippies, not Satanists, but I think they sort of conflated the two and maybe like thought a drum circle was like some kind of satanic gathering, but it was just a drum circle.
Sometimes a drum circle is just a drum circle.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
Fair enough.
commented many times on, when I do my own actual rituals out in the woods,
Well,
I
you are
wonder if I'm.
worshiping the devil, you Satan.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
wondering if
true.
I'm creating some kind of folklore about the woods of Maryland being permeated by satanic cults.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a
Well,
cult. There's just one
it's just
guy with
Yep, one lunatic.
bedevilment out there.
it's just one devil worshiper causing all this.
For anyone, I'm not serious. Octavian does
He
this
kids.
thing,
He
and I
kids.
give him grief about it.
He's just the one guy out there. No, I mean, hey, like I said, now that I think about it, man, yeah, me and my crew probably look pretty strange to these people. I know we've gone into different towns and we're like, we can't. So, a couple of weeks ago, I broke into the MUFON Symposium in Cincinnati, and it was a proud moment. But we were trying to figure out what to do afterwards, and one person had mentioned going to Bobby Mackey's Music World. And my historical researcher Anne in the group, she goes, I'm not taking you to a country bar because you're dressed like an alien. And I was dressed like an alien. So we've gone to places before, and people look at us and think we're strange. Well, we are, but we're not bad people.
Right. Yeah. That's
Which is probably the difference there. So, you were kind of talking about rolling out Bigfoot bodies, and potentially having it be discovered as an animal. I think even if that happens, I don't think that these sightings would stop. What I find really interesting about the phenomenon, that's why I say this, I'm not ready to let go of a flesh and blood element to this, because I think it's more interesting to look at it as something else is mimicking this thing. And what that would also imply is that whatever this something else is intelligent enough to realize that we have a strange fringe culture surrounding that thing. And I think that is, so far my best conclusion anyway. And it keeps me open to both possibilities.
there's certainly something to that, and my co-author Josh, at least the last time we spoke about this, because believe it or not, when we talk, we've sort of talk Bigfoot to death. So we really, it's like, how's
Oh,
your
really?
family
I
doing?
wouldn't have ever pegged you for a Bigfoot guy. I don't.
It's really more like, how's your family when we talk. It's not, so we rarely, specifically talk about Bigfoot anymore. So the last time we did talk about it, I believe that's kind of where he was, that he thought there, at least could be a flesh and blood creature, and there could be something that's sort of, no pun intended, or maybe big pun intended, aping the phenomena.
Sure.
Um, and it is rife with hoaxing, and hoaxing isn't a good thing, but it tends to draw weirdness in. For instance, the people who make the crop circles in the UK, and there are people who have admitted to making them. I'm not saying all of them are man-made. I don't know, but there are groups of people who said, no, we make them. But they also say, while we're making them, really weird stuff happens. We see weird lights. We see, other weird stuff out there. So, the whole hoaxing trickster thing, and that's more, Josh's bag. He wrote that chapter for the book, but
Right.
that winds into this stuff too. So wouldn't that be something that, the other could grab hold of, and play with? So yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it could be significant. It might not matter at all. That's kind of the fun of it, is that we don't know yet.
Yeah. And
Um,
I don't. Sadly, I don't think we get answers in our lifetime.
yeah,
Again, I hope I'm wrong. I would love it, if there was some kind of solid answer, but I think we're going to have to start accepting the fact that we might not know, but it's still a wonderful mystery and super interesting.
yeah. That was something that I had, when I had started, had kind of had to accept, is that, well, I guess I'm going to dedicate my whole life to this. But also, I might not find answers, and that is something that is hard to
Yeah,
grapple with,
yeah.
because typically you start it because you want
Right,
answers.
right. Yeah, I went through a period of like serious kind of depression almost, where I was like, when I realized, like, now you're not figuring this out, and I kind of had to sit myself down and say, like, hey, do you still like it? Do you find it interesting? And the answer was yes. And it's like,
Right.
well, are you okay with not having the answers? And had basically I had to answer yes to that too,
Well,
because
I mean, you're
or at
still
least
doing it,
accept
so.
it, 'cause-
Right. And you just kind of accept the fact that you may not, you might make a groundbreaking discovery, but you might not.
right.
But all you can do is hope to inch it a little closer
Yeah,
to that
yeah. I
discovery.
always say, like, I probably won't get to solve the puzzle, but maybe I can find a piece, like, find a piece of the
Yes.
puzzle.
I realized very early on when I started my show and when I really started digging into the research that I didn't care that much about evidence. I was there for the experience of it all. That was what was really important to me and what keeps me driving to this day.
That's fair, because I mean, honestly, what does it matter if it's real to everybody else if it's a real phenomena to you?
Hmm.
You don't need to prove the truth to yourself, because you already believe what you believe, and I think that's valid too. Different people definitely do it for different reasons, and I think there are still people that think they're going to find the Bigfoot body, or the sea monster. They're going to have a meeting with the aliens, and they're going to expose it all. I don't know. But I think that accepting that there may not be any huge win. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's still a rainbow, and rainbows are cool. So
Right on, right on.
but I want to ask this before I forget. So what do you make of the Patterson Gimlin film?
Hmm. It's fantastically interesting, and um, I allow me to vacillate, and I tell people, like, allow my opinion to change, and
Sure.
I'm always on the fence on it. Before recently, I leaned more on the it shows something, a real creature kind of thing, not someone in a costume, in other words. Now I'm leaning the other way just a little bit, but I'm still on the fence. I'm not going to rule out. It's definitely, like, when you look at, like, talk about, like, costume technology of the day, they seem to, again, depending on whose measurements you trust, it seems to be like the arms are a little too long, and they didn't really use arm extensions in costumes and stuff that day. I've seen other measurements though where people are like, nah, that's not, you can't really take those measurements in that way. and you don't know what you're looking at, et cetera, et cetera. So you can line up experts, serious experts on both sides that'll tell you it's real, it's fake, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not an expert. I'm just looking at it and going on gut things. I have heard some things recently that have made me sort of go, and it's just sort of like Bigfoot world gossip. So I'm not going to get into it. But
Sure.
it has made me sort of go, maybe there's more to doubt here than I thought before. But if it's a fake, it's certainly a very, very well done fake. And the most interesting thing to me is the original film cannot be found.
Yes, that's true.
So now I read somewhere at one point, I do not know how true this is. Again, I'm not a film expert, but that if the original film could be found, we could tell what speed it was recorded at. And if we could tell what speed it was recorded at, then it would change. We would know the height of the creature depending on what speed it's recorded at. It's either 6 foot tall or around 6 foot tall, or something more like 7 foot tall. Now, could it be a 7 foot tall? Yes, there are 7 foot tall people, but it makes it that more unlikely that it is a human if it is 7 foot tall. But like so much evidence when it comes to Bigfoot and other paranormal things, it has disappeared. And there are people who claim, oh, it's in this lawyer's office, or this guy owns it. Bring it out then, because until we have access to it, it has disappeared.
Yeah.
Just like so much of the DNA evidence and so much of the hair evidence, it just goes missing, which is a weird thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was referencing the famous tombstone photograph of the Thunderbird with all the hunters and how it's just gone. And it's just like a piece of cryptozoology lost media, because imagine if you could find it, how amazing that would be. But, here it is. And
whatever you think of, Melba Ketchum and her study, so many of those DNA samples, people are like, well, she didn't return my DNA sample. It's like, no, it went missing. Like, she wasn't trying to keep your DNA sample. They went missing. There's a woman who does hair sample testing I believe she's in Canada. And she said the number of samples that just go missing in the mail are insane. It's just, it's an odd phenomenon that surrounds this stuff.
Interesting. So if you, if you could, with everything that you're at right now, with everything that you've witnessed and researched and experienced, what do you think's going on here? And I know I can't hold you to it, right? This is more of a what's your personal opinion versus what's your professional opinion.
Right. And again, I'll ask me in 2 weeks and it might be different.
Right.
I feel like it's something to do with humanity. It's something to do with these like sort of a Jungian archetype thing. And I have to be very careful when I talk about this, because I think people think I'm saying everybody's crazy and they're not seeing these. No, I think they're 100% real when people are seeing them. I mean, as real as the desk in front of me. They're there. They're real things. People aren't making them up. They're not seeing illusions. But it's something to do with humanity and the way we connect with the unknown, and the unknowns perhaps need to connect with us. And it might, manifest as a Bigfoot for one person and a UFO for another, depending on maybe your frame of mind or what, the other thinks you might need, or what it might be trying to get from you. I have a lot of people say they're trying to get fear responses, this and that. I'm not sure. I don't know. But, it's something that's always been with us. It's something that we've been writing about. Our ancestors wrote about this stuff very clearly. A little bit of whispering down the lane. Some of the folklore gets, exaggerated and changed, but very clearly writing about the same things that we talk about today. Weird lights, hairy things in the woods, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always been with us. It's always lived next to us, usually in the woods or the whatever wilderness, in the mountains, the deserts. And it has perhaps something to do with our connection to, to nature, to the world itself, and to the other, this deeper than life experience. Some might call it tied in with religion, or you can just say, the universe, whatever.
I think that is probably the most diplomatic way that you could put it.
I agree.
Because it is crazy. I was going to ask Octavian, what do you think about what he just said?
I absolutely agree with everything he said.
I mean, I know you're
Obviously,
friends, but like, let's be honest here.
yeah, I mean, a lot of what Timothy has done, the research he's done, the idea he's put forth have absolutely influenced my work and my views on these things. So I would definitely agree. I mean, obviously, I'm going to add a little bit more on the uh, spiritual aspect of it. And I definitely feel that is a huge component in the whole thing. But overall, I'm very much in alignment with what Timothy is saying here.
Well, and and I'd agree too. We're just to the conclusions that we're at, and unfortunately that means that the story goes on, um or maybe not, unfortunately.
Yeah, I
I
mean, one of my favorite things to do is look at UFOs, and you go back to the late 1800s when the people were seeing airships.
hmm
What they look like? Well, they look like zeppelins that people were
yep.
describing, and we didn't have zeppelins yet. But shortly thereafter, we had zeppelins, and then into the 1940s, they become these sort of Art Deco crafts and the saucers, and then in the 70s we start getting the black triangles right before we get the stealth fighter. These black triangles, and they evolve. They're always like a few steps ahead of us technology wise. Now they're weird jellyfish things people are reporting. I wonder if we in 20 or 30 years if we'll have weird jellyfish craft. But
Oh
anyway,
my gosh, I love that. I love the atmospheric beasts. It's one of my it's one of my favorites.
but Bigfoot sort of does the opposite. So if you go back to medieval times, these were like they were hairy wild men in the woods, but they were like wizards. People would go to them for advice.
hmm
And then in the 1800s, in these old reports, you get these sort of weird things where sometimes they're wearing torn up clothes and carrying like an old rusty musket that won't work, but they're these big hairy things with glowing eyes. So it's like they're and now we get these very wild, very aggressive, Bigfoot reports with these like screaming, wild things. So it's like the UFOs are getting more complex and more technology complex, and they're staying ahead of us. And our wild man is getting wilder. It's getting more primitive. It's getting,
Hmm,
so it's almost like as we sort of get further away from nature and lean more on technology, and I always say we never have to experience the dark if we don't want to. We can leave lights on all the time. uh,
sure.
we don't have to experience the seasons. We can stay inside all the time. We don't, so we have removed ourselves from nature, and perhaps our wild man by necessity gets wilder as we get further away from nature. The UFO gets more, more stays ahead of us. Technology. It's very, very interesting stuff. But it seems like it's somehow tied to this experience that we have as humans.
Interesting. I think that my takeaway is that even looking at it, micromanage that a little bit. These experiences are very personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that that's something that we definitely need to pay attention to as well. Not so much because it will give us any answers as to exactly what whatever is, but more so we can understand why it happens. Um, and I think there's something to be said about that. We're always going to change culturally. The story's always going to be a little bit different. I think that's just, we prove that time and time and again. Just even talking about the satanic panic thing and the differences to where if, in the 1950s it was different. It
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised that the stories themselves change, but the experiences are still very real and, like I said, very personal. Every witness that I've talked to, this has kicked off, typically a series of events in their life that is altering. It's not just they saw something weird and it changed their perspective, but like it seems to have affected every other aspect of their personal lives. And I think there's something to be said for that as well. So, but that said, Octavian, do you have any other questions or anything that you think the audience would be interested in hearing from our guest?
I'm just kind of curious about what Tim has in the works that he hasn't mentioned. I know that me and Tim are currently working on some projects together right now, but other than that, what is in the pipeline for you right now, Tim?
Oh, I'm just trying to get podcast out every week and trying to get this Hermit's book done, which, like I said, sadly probably won't be in this year. I told everybody at the beginning of the year it would be this year, but it looks like it's going to be a bit. I just took on an illustration project for a group of, like, a collection of horror stories. So doing some illustration outside of my own stuff, and just trying to keep both podcasts rolling.
I know that game.
That's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's already just even one podcast. I mean,
Mhm.
like I said, I don't think people really quite understand all the work that goes into it, but I commend you for doing 2 podcasts, a book, and illustrations for and
I
research.
often say, people hear an hour podcast and they think we spend an hour of fun time doing it.
Right.
Not that it isn't fun, but it takes far longer than that to
Yeah,
put one
it's
together.
there's just a lot. Well, like we said, the 2 years of research in one little teeny tiny book. It's
Right. Yeah.
it's sometimes it feels a little daunting. So good for you. Where can people find you, follow you? Where can they hear your stuff?
All of my contact information and, like, links to my books on Amazon and links to my Etsy shop, if you want to get artwork or signed books, are at strangefamiliars.com. All of that information, all that contact information goes to me. If you want to hear me talk about saints and get into sort of more wondrous and mystical side of Catholicism, that's at thefloweredpath.com.
Interesting. And Octavian, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, so Strange Dominions has taken sort of a break the last few months, maybe 6 months, but we are gearing back up to be putting out new episodes. I have a lot of interviews lined up for the next month and 2 months. So you can find us all at strangedominionspodcast.com, our Facebook, Instagram, also on TikTok and YouTube. And I also am a somewhat frequent guest on Strange Familiars and The Flowered Path. So if you want to hear me, you can find me at all those different places.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, Tim, thanks for coming on. Octavian, thanks for assisting. I appreciate it. And with that being said, guys, we'll see you back here next Wednesday.